Welcome to the Forge. Today, we're working on a project I'm really excited about. I've been looking forward to this ever since we punched the hole in this hammerhead billet. We're going to be making a rounding hammer. Now I'm going to be doing all of this work alone and as much as possible with simple hand tools. A hydraulic press or a power hammer would make this go much quicker, but I want to show you that if you're willing to take the time, you can do this with pretty simple tools by yourself. The first operation is going to be drifting open the eye hole in the hammerhead. Now we have to drift from both sides evenly because we want to make an hourglass shape within the eye hole. I'm going to be using the hammer eye drift that we made in the earlier video. I'll put a card up here to link to it if you haven't seen that. I'm starting pretty slowly here. I'm just looking to make sure that the drift goes down straight and clears the bottom of the hammerhead. I don't want it to accidentally veer off and start gouging out material, and I want to make sure that I get all the way through before I start hammering hard just to avoid that problem. Now that we've made sure that the hammer eye drift clears the hammerhead, the next few heats are going to be all about progress. We're going to be throwing lots of heavy blows into this hammer drift, opening up this eye. Remember to go evenly from both sides. We need to get an hourglass shape inside of that eye hole. This is both to make it the right size to receive a hammer handle, but to make sure also that that hammer handle stays seated. It won't slide down the handle or fly off the top of the handle under striking forces. Oh, and make sure to cool down your drift between heats. That thing gets really hot. Although this is S7 tool steel we're talking about, we still don't want to overheat it and have a chance of it deforming or forge welding inside of the hammerhead. Once I've made it through, I'm going to flip this over, hammer out the drift, and then start drifting from the other side. I know about how high up the drift I need to hammer. I'm looking for about 1 1/8 by 3/4 of an inch of an opening on both sides of this hammer eye. That's the size handle that I want to fit, so I'm going to keep going until I get to that depth on both sides with this hammerhead. Normally when you're making a rounding hammer, you use something called a cupping tool. Typically that's a hardy tool that has a dish-shaped concave cavity into it that you hammer the hammer billet into. Now I don't have a cupping tool, and I've been so eager about this project I didn't want to stop and make one, so I was planning just to use this swage block. It has a half sphere depression, which is just the right size to get the kind of convex shape on the rounding hammer that I want. I checked it all ahead of time and it looked great, but the problem here is when I hammer down on the hammer billet, the drift is impacting the side of the swage block. This means that I can't get the hammerhead deep enough to really form that convex shape on the hammerhead billet. So I'm not able to form the rounding profile on that face like I wanted to. That means I'm going to move over to the tear-shaped depression that you can see off to the left-hand side of the screen. It's not as good, it's certainly not deep enough, so it's not going to fully form the rounding face, but at least it'll convex the edges of the hammerhead, and that'll give us somewhere to start with. We'll have to solve the rest of that problem down the road. With the hammer eye drifted open to the right size, now we're going to do the next two operations at the same time. We're going to be continuing to hammer that convex shape into the rounding hammer face in the teardrop depression, which again isn't the greatest, but it's something we can start with. We're also going to be taking this over to the anvil and working to pull out the cheeks. Basically, we're hammering down the cheeks while the drift is still in the hammerhead, making sure to hammer only on the high side of the drift, which is everything from the center back towards the handle of the drift, because we're trying to form up that high side, that top part of the hourglass. Then we'll take it back to the swage block, knock out the drift, set it in from the other side, and do the same operation. We want to flatten out these cheeks and pull them down to reinforce that hourglass shape and to get rid of the bulges that occurred from us drifting open that eye hole. Make sure you take your time when you're working the cheeks. One wrong hit can accidentally close up the eye hole on the far side. So be sure to hit only in the middle and towards the handle side, the high side of the drift. If you mishit and hit on the far side of the drift, the low side of the drift, and close up that eye hole, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. Just take it right back over and switch out the drift and open it back up. You don't want to continue working after you've made that kind of mistake. It's best to address it right away. Once it's all opened back up to the right dimension, then continue on working the cheeks. I'm using a wide fullering die in the hardy hole here as kind of my backer. This helps make sure that I'm spreading material on both sides of the hammer die. I'm pulling out the cheeks, top and bottom, using that fullering tool underneath. This isn't completely necessary, so if you do not have a fullering tool to put into the hardy, don't worry, you can use this right on the flat. Alright, the hammerhead is really coming together. Now that we've drifted open the eye hole, we have a great hourglass shape, it's the right dimension, we've rough formed the rounding face, and we've hammered down the cheeks. This hammerhead's looking great. The next step is going to be purely aesthetic. I'm going to be adding trough lines to separate the striking faces from the hammerhead body. Now, this isn't something you have to do, but it's pretty popular right now and I like the way it looks. So we're going to give it a try. Now, the problem here is that this is usually an operation that's done with machinery. Either a press or a power hammer, something that can reliably line up two fullers, top and bottom, every single blow. Now, trying to do that with your hammer and a bottom fuller and like a hardy hole is extremely difficult. So I've borrowed a tool called a guillotine tool, and we're going to give it a shot. Now you'll probably notice right away that this is not an easy tool to use. I've seen other guillotine designs that would be much better, but this one is very tight and closed up. It's hard to see where the fullers are lining up, and it's very hard to hold the work. The opening where you put your workpiece is also very small, so I keep having to remove the top die just to look and try to line things up. But once I put the die back in the guillotine, I basically can't see anything, and I'm hammering blind. This is a tough situation to be in, but a lot of the time when you're a solo blacksmith and you're only working with what hand tools you have available or simple mechanical tools like this type of guillotine, you've got to make the best of it. So we're going to take our time and we're going to try to get these trough lines as deep and as well set as we can. Wow, this guillotine is a lot of work. So one of the things I'm noticing is that the power really isn't getting from the hammer into the workpiece. It seems like this guillotine's design and its poor fit into the swage block is causing a lot of that mechanical energy to just get lost. It's jumping around, it's clattering, it's making a ton of noise, but it's not really making a deep impression on the hammerhead billet. So I'm going to keep working this, trying to stay at the higher heats to see if we can make some good progress with these fuller lines. It's very difficult to hold the hammerhead billet and keep it in line while I'm swinging onto the top of the guillotine trying to set a fuller. Part of that's because I'm so hyper-focused on trying to make everything lined up that I'm not looking at my hand and how I'm holding the workpiece. I'm just focusing on that top fuller and trying to hit it as hard as I can once the hammerhead is in line. I will fully admit that my fuller lines are running kind of all over the place, and I've had a couple of instances already where they've jumped completely out of the trough line and set a second trough line. This is not going to be the prettiest hammerhead, but this is something that we can clean up after the fact. It's been pretty frustrating trying to set these fuller lines with this guillotine tool because it's just not transferring the energy from my blow into the workpiece efficiently. As a result, I started taking multiple blows repeatedly to try to set those fuller lines very, very deep. Unfortunately, this caused the guillotine and the workpiece to jump all over the place. And now I've got trough lines that don't line up top and bottom. Some places I have double trough lines. And it's really turned into a bit of a mess, and I only have myself to blame. Going too fast here is going to mean that I'm going to have to spend a lot more time in the next phase, probably hand filing to clean up these issues. But even with those problems, I'm super happy with how this has come together. We've made a ton of progress just working alone with simple tools. While this guillotine may look kind of crazy and difficult, it's really just a couple of bolts and a couple pieces of cut metal. It's very simple, and there are other designs out there that you can make for yourself even easier. So I really encourage you to go out and make something. Start a project. Don't wait for having all of the tools or all of the equipment that you think you need. With just some hand files, a forge, an anvil, and a hammer, you can make a lot of things. With just those simple beginnings, you can make pretty much every tool that you can need. So I really want to encourage you, try it. Go out, give it a shot. If you don't have your own workshop or your own space, take a class. This stuff is amazing and it improves your life. Oh, and when you make something, don't forget to put your touch mark in it. Thanks for coming along on part 1 of the rounding hammer project, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.